Hi, I'm a Catholic priest, and I'm here to answer your questions about Respect Life Month. So we're going to do a short series of videos, and this first one today is on abortion. And so I'm going to be taking your questions from social and take a crack at some answers. Here we go. The first one from socials is, how should we respond to someone who says, a fetus is not a person? And I'm going to group this with a couple other similar questions we had. What does the church say about life when it begins? Why does the Catholic Church believe that life begins at conception? And what's the basis for this belief? Well, the Latin fetus literally means offspring or bringing forth. So the immediate question that should raise for us is the offspring of who? Or the bringing forth of what? And the obvious response in the case at hand is a human being, a human life. Embryology textbooks state that an embryo is called a fetus at the 8th week after fertilization. And this is when major organs have been formed and recognizable features already developed are growing. But at 18 days, the heart began to beat. 6 weeks, the brain coordinates movements and responds to touch. 9 weeks, there are permanent individual fingerprints. 10 weeks, touch, comfort, pain. 12 weeks, a smile, sucking her thumb, making a fist. At what point can you look back and say, that's not a human life? Well, the church has not committed itself to an affirmation of a philosophical nature on personhood debates, but says in the catechism that the embryo, literally young one, or the earliest stage of life, must be treated from conception as a person. This is because at whatever stage of development, this is now a human life, indisputably. That's why the church has taught from the first century that abortion, elective, procured, or direct abortion, is wrong. And to be clear, we're talking about elective abortion, which is an important distinction, because, for example, in Spanish, the word for miscarriage is also aborto, or aborto espontáneo, spontaneous abortion, from the literal Latin meaning of the word to miscarry. And some of the most contentious debates in our culture right now are conflating everything as like miscarrying as abortion, which leads to a lot of inaccuracies, whether intentional or not. We're talking about elective abortion, the deliberate choice to miscarry to end the life of the child in the womb. And this is to be distinguished from miscarriage, which brings its own real pain. And it's good that we're having a lot more conversations about it, grief support, healing for those who've experienced miscarriage. And we also in the church have a commitment to post-abortion healing, which I want to mention right now up front. We have a website you can visit to explore that more. We have a hotline, 1-800-722-4356. This is not a theoretical topic, but a painful one. And some people might want to just shut it off from the beginning. So I want to say up front, the church cares deeply about those suffering from the pain and trauma surrounding abortion, miscarriage, pregnancy, reproductive health for women. And as a Catholic community, we want to accompany one another, reach out in love to our neighbors. All right, so we'll take our next question. What would you say to someone who's considering abortion? Well, I would start by not saying anything at all, or not much, but to listen. If someone is entrusting you with this conversation, it's likely because you are a friend, a family member, other trusted and respected voice in their life. Now, this is obviously an incredibly difficult situation for them, and your first reaction will set a tone for them. I'd let her know that I'm committed to her as a person and to her well-being and to walking with her in this difficult time. You might share experiences related to having a baby yourself, maybe adoption, maybe marriage, maybe other community support. Paint a picture of open options and pathways with hope that are life-giving for this person. Give encouragement, assistance, and work towards a plan, but with a light touch and a commitment to providing support that will make all the difference. And don't take any of it lightly, because there are obviously reasons that she has for considering an abortion, which need to be taken with the utmost seriousness. A personal context and reality for her that's not going to likely change the moment someone changes their mind. This is not some sort of means to an end of saving a baby. This is a woman in front of you, an end in and of herself, and she deserves every consideration and affirmation of her dignity and agency. How does the church respond to arguments regarding a woman's right to choose? Well, let me say a couple things about this. First, the church affirms the rights and agency of women, period. Pope St. Paul VI concluded an address to women in 1965 saying, quote, women of the entire universe, whether Christian or non-believing, you to whom life is entrusted at this grave moment in history, it is for you to save the peace of the world. We've certainly grown and continue to grow in our understanding of how St. Paul called the Galatians towards this true unity in the body of Christ, saying there's no male nor female. How it's to be received, we're growing in questions of men's and women's roles, masculinity and femininity, and in much of the debates on women's right to choose, we are not always entirely honest in discussions of bodily autonomy. What do I mean by that? Persons and bodies have had a dreadful history in the United States as property, in a specifically capitalist sense. And we need to recover a sense of the social being of persons and our interrelatedness with one another. At the same time, we might sympathize with those who see this as a backdoor attempt at control. Notice how there is little public conversation worrying about childless men, male reproduction, or even what men should or should not be able to do with their property, bodily or otherwise. Well, once we're in this contest of property rights, the rights of the woman, the rights of the fetus, we have already ceded the ground away from a Catholic conversation. We do use the language of rights, right? But in a particular way, more fundamental for us and more theological. We believe that life is a gift, that we are creatures of a loving God who has created us, given us life, inherent dignity, and made us in God's own divine image and likeness. As I said, we speak in both of these ways, but you can see the difference it makes. If we think primarily in terms of rights, we will find ourselves, as we often do, in an interminable debate about whose rights are more important, the unborn child in the womb or the woman in whose womb that child resides, and upon whom that child depends for life itself. The focus on rights is even more appealing sometimes when life does not always present itself as a gift, but rather at times as a challenge or a burden or suffering or even a threat. We need to acknowledge that we have not always listened to and taken seriously the experiences of women. There's an important reflection from Federica Matthews Green I'd like to share. She's an Eastern Orthodox Christian thinker and writer. She suggests, yes, if you were in charge of a nature preserve, and you noticed that the pregnant female mammals were trying to miscarry their pregnancies, eating poisonous plants, or injuring themselves, what would you do? Would you think of it as a battle between the pregnant female and her unborn and find ways to help those pregnant animals miscarry? No, of course not. You would immediately think, something must be really wrong in this environment. Something is creating an intolerable stress, so much so that animals would rather destroy their own offspring than bring them into the world. You would strive to identify and correct whatever factors were causing this stress in the animals. She continues, the same thing goes for the human animal. Abortion gets presented to us as if it were something women want. Both pro-choice and pro-life rhetoric can at times reinforce that idea. But women do this only if all their other options look worse. It's supposed to be her choice, yet so many women say, I really didn't have a choice. You can see maybe how this way of thinking could help us all to approach this question in a very different way, to look at the whole ecosystem, right? Let's look at the next question. What is the Church's stance on cases of abortion when the mother's life is at risk? Well, the Church, precisely because of its ethical concerns for the human person, going way back to its beginnings, has spent a lot of time reflecting on this and has a great deal of wisdom to bring to bear, which can be found, for example, in the ethical and religious directives, we call them the ERDs, for Catholic healthcare. It acknowledges difficult cases, and it has direction and help for navigating the crises that arise in the context of pregnancy, including very painfully tragic ones like ectopic pregnancies or difficult fetal diagnoses. These are not new questions for Catholic ethical reflection. By definition, for Catholics, if an act is taken to save the life of the mother, which has a secondary effect of ending the life of the fetus, that is by definition not an abortion. The intention is not to take the life of the child. And this is part of the cultural confusion right now and a lot of the difficult conversations. And I think there's room for common ground on these difficult cases to acknowledge the overlap, even things like perinatal palliative care, how to care for kids who are born who just are not going to make it. What do we do? How do we respond? Next question. Why does the church oppose abortion in cases of rape or incest? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that these are incredibly tragic and evil circumstances. The most extreme cases of life appearing not as a gift, but as a threat or even further trauma. But even in these circumstances, we maintain that adding one violence to another violence is not the way. The ethical and religious directives do state that a female who has been raped should be able to defend herself against a potential conception from the sexual assault. If after appropriate testing, there is no evidence that conception has already occurred, she may be treated with medications that would prevent ovulation, sperm capacitation, or fertilization." End quote. Destroying the life of a child, adding to the trauma of the rape victim, these neither punish the rapist nor end the trauma of the survivor. There are no easy answers in the wake of this evil, and we ought not to pretend that this is ever an easy decision. What we can do is commit to love, to accompany, to support, perhaps to facilitate adoption, and otherwise assist this woman in need and her unborn child. The next question is, how can we help to support women and families in need? And we had a similar question of, how does the church support women facing unplanned pregnancies or those who've had abortions? In the U.S., recent statistics suggest over 1 million abortions took place last year, the highest number in a decade. After nearly 3 decades of decline, in the last 7 years, we have now seen a marked increase. We believe that abortion is a political question, not just because there is legislation related to abortion or policy, but because welcoming children into this world is itself a socio-political question. That is, it has to do with our social arrangements and support for women, children, and families, for how we organize our society, institutions, support systems to enable the flourishing of persons, women, children, and families, all of us together. That could be we the church, we the people of the United States of America, we Californians, we in Orange County, we in our family. We need to be aware that these are different we's. And that's why at its most basic, the political question around abortion cannot be only about one way to vote, or even about voting in general. Because, for example, within the church, we don't hold elections, as opposed to, say, the we of the United States. But there are many things that we can do ourselves and to work for and to empower and accompany women and to welcome and support children. I could list off just a few examples. We could provide childcare and consider initiatives to make our parishes and Mass itself a welcoming place for children and families, and many parishes do this so well. We can provide food and do provide food for struggling families through St. Vincent de Paul conferences and food pantries. We can provide shelter, housing, and jobs through parish connections and many forms of practical support in partnership with our pregnancy centers, clinics, and shelters. And we have the names of all those at our website, and you can find them at our page, rcbo.org, under Find Help, Pregnancy Support. All these kinds of accompaniment that in recent years have gone by the name Walking with Moms in Need. And we hold a Walking with Moms in Need collection to raise funds for all these efforts. And we can commit ourselves to be sure that everyone who comes to our parish knows that they are loved, worthy, and wanted. And we can commit to walking with them, come what may. And yes, we can pray, work, and vote to support action and policies that truly support women, children, and families. I think we'll also acknowledge our failures and the tragedy that sometimes we are not able to provide the support needed. And sometimes the tragic decision for abortion is made. And even, or especially then, we continue to walk with those in need and provide resources for support, for healing, for hope with a future. But finally, at the end of the day, our respect for life is about loving our neighbors and our witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We commit ourselves to pray and to proclaim the good news into very difficult situations, the most, to those at the margins, to the poor, to the vulnerable, to women who feel that there is no place to turn and who assume that they have lost all autonomy, that they have real choices, and that there is a future with freedom, support, dignity, healing. To men, There is good news that it is not only possible but virtuous to take responsibility for our actions. The church offers freedom from enslavement to porn culture, locker room talk, and the objectification of women. Sadly, we've had plenty of examples of failure in those regards from religious and political leaders. The church is keen to point out the connections around issues that impact abortion, from responsible parenthood to addressing incredible injustices around things like domestic violence, human trafficking, and lack of health care, child care, and other social supports, which make lives for women and children incredibly difficult. The church views abortion as a moral evil, as sin, and inextricably connected to other systemic evils, because our concern for life and dignity is always concern for the whole person, and whole persons are social beings in whole realities. The good news is that there is forgiveness, healing, hope, freedom, and restoration, not only for each of us, but for all of creation. So next week, we're going to talk about assisted suicide and the death penalty. Join us then and for future weeks during Respect Life Month.